The federal government is urging Atlantic Canadians to switch to heat pumps from oil. Last week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a 3-year exemption from the carbon tax for home heating and doubled the rural supplement in the carbon tax rebate program in Atlantic Canada. Wayne Grosko is an adjunct professor in resource and environmental studies at Dalhousie University. So I guess first off, what did you make of the Prime Minister's announcement last week? How do you think it will impact folks in this part of the country?
So the announcement for further incentives for people to install heat pumps, I think will really encourage a lot more people to install them. And it's important to note that a lot of people are already installing heat pumps. So this is adding an incentive onto what are already existing incentives, plus the energy and money savings that people can get from installing a heat pump. So it's kind of a win-win in terms of people who want to switch their heating system away from oil or from electric baseboard.
Well, why do you think people have already jumped on the heat pump bandwagon in this part of the country?
Yeah, so in Atlantic Canada, there are a lot of homes that are heated by oil, and it can be quite expensive to operate when heating by oil. And so switching to heat pumps has already been quite attractive, especially compared with parts of the country where it's more common to heat with natural gas, because natural gas is a little cheaper to operate. So it's a really attractive value proposition already to put in a heat pump. And this incentive just also makes it more possible for people who might not be able to afford to do it, even if they really want to do it.
Now, is a heat pump a good way to reduce your carbon footprint?
It certainly is, and I've run the numbers. If your heat pump is replacing or displacing electric resistance heating, then it cuts the greenhouse gas emissions to about 1/3 of what your home heating emissions would be. And if it's replacing or displacing oil-fired heating, it cuts it about in half, roughly speaking, about 52%. So it's a considerable improvement in your carbon footprint if you can get a heat pump.
Well, if a lot of people do make the switch to heat pumps, talk to me about the grid and whether it will be able to handle all of that.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. Whenever a heat pump is added to a home that's using electric resistance heating, that's actually better for the grid because now you have a lower wattage heating system. However, when it's added to a home that is using oil heating, then that is an additional heating demand on the electrical grid that is likely to happen on one of those cold winter evenings around 6 p.m. when we hit our peak demand. So demand on the grid in terms of the maximum demand that has to be supplied by having to turn on extra generators and so on, that can potentially be made more difficult and challenging by having more and more heat pumps. So that is definitely something that the electricity system operator and all stakeholders involved are really having to deal with.
Now, what about folks who have maybe an older home, multiple rooms, not quite the flow that an open concept would have? Is it still worth it to get a heat pump in that situation, and will they be as effective?
So most buildings can use a heat pump quite well. And what most people are installing are the ductless mini split heat pumps, which is, maybe your viewers can see, I've got one on the wall here, but you'll know these ones that, blow heat into the room that they're in. And because they don't have ducts, they work better in a place that's kind of open concept. But if your home is bigger and maybe is divided up into many more rooms, then it's still possible to get a heat pump, but you will likely have to get more of them and with multiple heads on them so that you can get the heat into different rooms. So it can be a more expensive installation if you've got a more complex situation like that. But then again, if the house is bigger, then you're also going to save more on your oil or other energy. So it may make up the difference.
Of course, there are those rare days in the winter where the temperature really plummets and heat pumps are not as effective. Do you think that might deter some people from getting them?
Possibly some, but the thing about most heat pump installations is that they're usually additional to the heating system that you already have. So if you have an oil or electric heating system or even wood that is working well, there's no reason to get rid of it in the short term because it can act as the backup on those colder days, unless it's a really old oil furnace, and then in which case you may need to get rid of it. And most heat pump systems, you can get an option to have a backup electric resistance heater in it, which will make up for those times when it's too cold for the heat pump to work effectively. Which those times are a very small number of days in the year. Most days in the year, a heat pump will work quite effectively in Nova Scotia's climate.
All right, well, thank you so much for walking us through that. We appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks for chatting. It's been fun.